Yul Brynner watched the electronic timer flash 0.4 seconds, listened to the scattered applause, and said nothing. 1961, Arizona desert. Behind the sound stages of Paramount Studios, 92 degrees in the late afternoon heat. And Glenn Ford was proving to anyone who would watch that precision could be measured down to the tenth of a second. If you're fascinated by untold stories of Yul Brynner's legendary encounters that revealed the difference between performance and survival, subscribe to Yul Brynner Untold Legacy for more hidden moments where reality met Hollywood's finest. The 45-year-old Ford had just completed another perfect draw. Colt Peacemaker, single action, custom grips worn smooth by thousands of practice sessions. His stance was textbook perfect, feet positioned exactly shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, right hand hovering 4 inches from the holster. When the signal came, his movement was pure poetry, smooth, controlled, mechanical in its precision. The electronic timer didn't lie, 0.4 seconds from signal to shot. Faster than most professional gunfighters in competitive fast-draw circuits, faster than any actor in Hollywood had ever achieved on camera or off. "Magnificent," said the weapons coordinator, a former Marine named Pete Hernandez who had worked on dozens of Westerns. "That's the fastest draw I've ever timed in 30 years of this business." Ford holstered the Peacemaker with the same careful precision he'd used to draw it. Everything calculated, everything measured, everything perfect. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a white handkerchief and looked around the small gathering of crew members who had stayed after wrap to watch his practice session. "It's all about mechanics," Ford explained, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had mastered his craft completely. "Muscle memory, consistent grip, proper stance. Practice the same motion 10,000 times, and eventually your body performs it without your mind getting in the way." A script supervisor named Helen Martinez nodded appreciatively. "No wonder you look so natural in your Western roles. You actually know what you're doing." Ford smiled. "I believe in authenticity. If I'm going to play a gunfighter, I should at least be able to handle a gun like one. The audience can tell the difference between someone who's practiced and someone who's just acting." That's when he noticed the figure standing 30 feet away, perfectly still in the shadows cast by the equipment trucks. Black shirt, black pants, arms crossed, watching with those dark eyes that seemed to record everything and reveal nothing. "Yul," Ford called out, his voice friendly but carrying a hint of challenge. "You've been standing there for a while. What did you think of the demonstration?" Yul Brynner stepped out of the shadows, slowly, deliberately, his boots making soft sounds in the desert dirt. He moved like a man who had never hurried for anyone, who understood that stillness often carried more weight than motion. "Impressive," Yul said, his voice quiet but carrying easily across the space. "Very impressive. Your technique is flawless." Ford straightened slightly, sensing something in the tone that wasn't quite a compliment. "Thank you. Would you like to try it? I'd be curious to see how the King of Siam handles a Colt." The comment was meant to be light, friendly competition between professionals. But something in the air shifted. The crew members sensed it. That moment when casual conversation becomes something more serious, more dangerous. Yul walked closer, each step measured and controlled. "You drew in 0.4 seconds, he observed. "That's faster than most men could ever achieve. Certainly faster than anything required for cameras." "It is," Ford agreed, clearly proud of his achievement. "Took me 3 years to get that fast. Most actors never even attempt this level of precision." Yul stopped about 6 feet away from Ford, close enough that normal social distance rules applied, but not so close as to be openly threatening. Yet somehow his presence filled the space between them. 3 years, Yul repeated thoughtfully, to master 0.4 seconds. "And you're right. It is very fast for a movie." Ford's smile faltered slightly. There was something in Yul's tone, something that suggested a larger point being made. "But?" Ford prompted, sensing the unfinished thought. Yul looked at the electronic timer, still displaying Ford's record time. "In a real confrontation, Mr. Ford, 0.4 seconds is an eternity." The observation hung in the desert air like smoke. Helen Martinez glanced nervously between the two men. Pete Hernandez set down his clipboard. Everyone could feel the conversation shifting into territory that had nothing to do with movie making. Ford's confidence flickered. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, Yul took another step closer. Now he was within arm's reach, well inside what experts call the danger zone, the distance at which firearms become less important than awareness, positioning, and commitment. "Your draw is perfect for a sport," Yul said quietly. "Measured distance, known signal, controlled environment. Both participants starting at the same time, both following the same rules." He gestured toward the timer setup. "But real violence doesn't wait for signals. Real violence begins before anyone reaches for a weapon. It begins in the eyes, in the breathing, in the decision to act." Without warning, Yul's hand moved, not to a gun, but to Ford's wrist. He grasped it gently but firmly, just as Ford instinctively started to step back toward his holster. "You see?" Yul said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to everyone present. "Your 0.4 seconds assumed we both started moving at the same time, but I started moving while you were still thinking about it." Ford stood frozen, his hand trapped, his perfect stance disrupted, his practiced technique rendered useless by someone who had simply acted first. "In survival," Yul continued, still holding Ford's wrist, "the fastest draw doesn't win. The man who has already decided to act wins. The man who moves while his opponent is still considering whether to move. The man who understands that real confrontations are won in the mind, not the holster." He released Ford's wrist and stepped back, but something fundamental had changed. The demonstration area felt different now, charged with an understanding that hadn't been there before. Ford rubbed his wrist, not because it hurt. Yul hadn't applied pressure, but because the touch had carried a message that couldn't be ignored. "Where did you learn that?" "Places where 0.4 seconds might as well be 4 minutes, Yul replied simply. "Places where hesitation meant not getting a second chance to practice." Pete Hernandez found his voice. "Jesus, I've been around guns my whole life and I never thought about it that way." Yul looked at Ford directly. "Your skill is remarkable. Your dedication is admirable. Your technique is something most men could never achieve. But technique, Mr. Ford, serves survival, not the other way around." Ford was quiet for a long moment, processing what had just happened. When he spoke, his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "You could have made me look foolish just then." "Why would I want to do that?" "To prove you were faster." Yul smiled slightly. "I'm not faster than you, Mr. Ford. Your draw is extraordinary. But I'm older, and older means I learned certain lessons before I had the luxury of treating them as entertainment." He walked over to the timer display, studied the readout, 0.4 seconds. Truly impressive. "But may I suggest something?" Ford nodded. "Practice drawing while someone is talking to you, while someone is asking you questions, while someone is moving around you unpredictably. Practice drawing when you're surprised, when you're tired, when you're not expecting it." Yul looked back at Ford. "Because real confrontations never happen under perfect conditions. They happen when you're distracted, when you're off balance, when you're not ready. And in those moments, all the perfect technique in the world matters less than having already made the decision to survive." Ford listened intently. "You're talking about training for chaos instead of precision. I'm talking about understanding that precision serves a larger purpose. Your 0.4 seconds is beautiful, but it's only useful if you can access it when you need it most, which is never when you're ready for it." Yul started to walk away, then stopped. "One more thing, Mr. Ford. In movies, both men draw at the same time because it's dramatic. In reality, the smart man never lets it get that far. He either avoids the confrontation entirely, or he ends it before weapons become necessary." Ford called after him. "How do you end it before weapons become necessary?" Yul turned back, his dark eyes reflecting something that Ford couldn't quite identify. "You make it clear that you've already decided what you're willing to do. Most people, when faced with someone who has genuinely crossed that line in their mind, will find reasons not to test it." The conversation ended there. Ford spent the rest of the evening thinking about timing, not just the precision timing he had mastered, but the more subtle timing of recognition, decision, and action that Yul had demonstrated without ever drawing a weapon. 3 days later, Ford approached Yul during a break in filming. "I've been thinking about what you said, about real confrontations starting before anyone reaches for a gun." Yul nodded. "And?" "I realized I've been training to be fast in a gunfight." "But you're talking about being smart enough not to need one. Or smart enough to win it before it begins," Yul corrected. "There's a difference between avoiding conflict and controlling its terms." Ford was quiet for a moment. Would you be willing to show me some of those other kinds of timing? Not just speed, but positioning, awareness, decision-making." Yul studied Ford's face, perhaps assessing his sincerity. "Why?" "Because I realized that all my practice has been about perfecting a skill I hope I never need. But if I ever did need it, I'd want to understand it completely. Not just the mechanics, but the—" Ford searched for the right word. "The reality," Yul finished. "Yes, the reality." They spent several evenings after that working together. Not on speed, but on situational awareness, on reading body language, on understanding the psychological elements that determined outcomes before weapons were ever drawn. Ford's draw time remained at 0.4 seconds, but his understanding of when and how to use that skill deepened considerably. Years later, in a 1978 interview for a documentary about Western films, Ford was asked about his most valuable learning experience in Hollywood. "Yul Brynner taught me that mastery isn't just about perfecting a technique," Ford said. "It's about understanding the context in which that technique serves you. I could draw a gun in 0.4 seconds, and I was proud of that speed. But Yul showed me that real skill is knowing when you need speed, when you need patience, and when you need to act before your opponent even realizes a confrontation has begun." The interviewer asked if Yul had been faster than Ford. Ford smiled. "He was smarter, and in the end, smart beats fast every time. Because smart chooses the terms of the engagement. Fast just responds to them." The documentary crew also interviewed Pete Hernandez, the weapons coordinator who had witnessed their first encounter. "I've worked with hundreds of actors over 40 years, Pete said. Most of them learned to handle guns for the cameras. A few learned to handle them for sport, but Yul handled them for reasons none of us could fully understand, and it showed in everything he did." Pete paused, choosing his words carefully. When Glenn drew his gun, it was a performance, even during practice. Beautiful, precise, impressive. When Yul moved, even just to touch someone's wrist, it was something else entirely. It was purposeful in a way that made you realize the difference between learning a skill and living with the knowledge that you might need it. Yul Brynner himself never discussed the encounter publicly, but in his personal notes, found among his papers after his death, he wrote, "Met an actor today who has achieved genuine mastery in technique. His dedication is remarkable. I hope our conversation helped him understand that true preparation extends beyond perfect execution to include perfect judgment about when execution is necessary." The entry concluded, "Speed is a tool. Wisdom is knowing when to use it, when to avoid needing it, and when to act before speed becomes relevant. The highest skill is making confrontation unnecessary. The second highest is ending it quickly when it becomes inevitable." This story reminds us that expertise has multiple dimensions. Technical mastery, like Ford's 0.4-second draw, represents one level of achievement. Strategic understanding represents another. The highest level combines both, the ability to perform flawlessly when necessary and the wisdom to rarely make it necessary. In Hollywood, where performance often substitutes for reality, that afternoon in the Arizona desert provided a rare lesson in the difference between perfecting a skill and understanding its true purpose. If this story of technique meeting wisdom resonated with you, Yul Brynner Untold Legacy is dedicated to preserving exactly these kinds of encounters. The moments when Yul Brynner's hard-earned life experience intersected with Hollywood's finest talents, creating teaching moments that went far beyond entertainment. His life was filled with opportunities to show others that true mastery extends beyond technical ability to include psychological preparation, strategic thinking, and moral clarity about when and how to use one's skills. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to discover more stories where the man behind the legend revealed what genuine preparation looks like when it's been tested by necessity, not just practice. Because some knowledge can only be gained through experience that we hope we never need.